All right, well, good morning and welcome to the Tuesday morning Bible study. Today we are in chapter 38 of Genesis. Last week, of course, we began the Joseph cycle of stories. It's the final section of the book, chapters 37 through 50. We've been through the primeval narrative of the chapters 1 through 11, through the Abraham cycle from chapters 12 through 25, and then the Jacob cycle from 25 to chapter 36. And so last week we began the Joseph cycle and noted that it's interesting that there even is a Joseph cycle, given the fact that Joseph's descendancy is not followed. He is the younger brother of some of the more, at least ancestrally speaking, some of the more important brothers, but like Judah or Levi, brothers like that who are going to be important as far as being the ancestor of, people who are going to be the movers and shakers in subsequent Israelite history. We said that one thing that makes the Joseph cycle stand out, especially by comparison to the Abraham and Jacob cycles, is that whereas with the Abraham and Jacob cycles, the accounts are fairly episodic, meaning that you get episodes from their lives but each episode kind of stands alone, has a certain integrity of its own. Whereas the Joseph story, the Joseph cycle, is actually a continuous narrative. Like one thing really directly follows from the thing before it. Okay. And so it's like Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon album. It's not so much discrete songs, but really just kind of like a continuous concert. All right. Of course, none of you are Pink Floyd fans, so that's completely lost on you now. But anyway, yeah, I know. So anyways, but today's chapter 38 is actually the one exception to that rule about the Joseph cycle being something that is continuous rather than episodic. We have an episode in chapter 38, which is not directly connected to everything else going on, although it is going to be important for all subsequent Israelite history in ways that we'll discuss in a little bit. Okay, so today, and let me just say as a just word of warning, this is a like many other stories in the book of Genesis, as we have seen, this is a weird story. It's one of those stories that will never ever be part of a children's Bible. Just won't be and shouldn't be. And there are a couple of historical curiosities in it as well. So let's get started. Chapter 38. Let's read through verse 11 to really get everything off the bat here. It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and settled near a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Sheila. He married her and went into her. Now, just for make sure you understand, the daughter that Judah married is not named Sheila. The daughter he married is the daughter of Sheila. Okay, just for clarification. I got a while back when I was reading, I got a little messed up on that for a second. It's not the daughter named Sheila, it's Sheila's father that is named Sheila. Or I'm sorry, it's the daughter's father that's named Sheila. Okay. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Sheila. He married her and went into her. She conceived and bore a son, and he named him Er. Again she conceived and bore a son, whom she named Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she named him Sheila. She was in Kezib when she bore him. Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, his son, "Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Raise up offspring for your brother." But since Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, he spilled his semen on the ground whenever he went into his brother's wife, so that he would not give offspring to his brother. What he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Remain a widow in your father's house," that is in Shua's house, until, not Shua, not Shua, forget about it, I misspoke. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Sheila grows up," for he feared that he too would die, like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. Okay, we'll pause there. Okay, now does everybody have the relationships clear in your head? Because it's important that we know who's who. Okay.
I think so.
Okay, because I remember early, at one point when I was reading this, I actually got the relationships a little screwed up for a second. I was thinking, okay, wait a minute, how is Sheila related to Tamar? Okay, they're not. That's actually the point. Sheila is the youngest brother of Tamar's deceased husband, Er, and thus the whole question of remaining a widow, Judah saying to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Sheila grows up." Okay, for he feared that he too would die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. Okay. All right, so what's going on here?
Well, the tradition of the next in line brother stepping up to take care of any widows that happen in the family.
Right.
Although it's kind of puzzling that Onan would say he knew that the issue would not be his. I mean, I wonder how they did that. So it absolutely would be the son of,
obviously it'd be biologically his, but yeah, legally, legally, such a child born of an act of sex between Onan and Er's widow would be legally Er's offspring, not Onan's. Onan could have his own offspring by getting his own wife.
and probably did. It doesn't say that.
It doesn't say that he did or
so
didn't.
We wonder if, why was this such a big deal for him if he had his own children and all that.
And then, and perhaps you could conclude that maybe he doesn't have his own wife, and maybe that's why he's taking the attitude that he does. Yeah. Okay, what else?
Well, God's pretty vengeful here for what I would see as somewhat minor offenses. He displeased him. He didn't say how. Well, it says how he displeased Onan, but the others, they just displeased God, and God put them to death. That's That's a bit harsh, I guess, for
Yeah,
for
yeah.
God.
Very fair. Very
Sort
fair
of
to say.
without reason stated, I guess.
Yeah.
Uh,
Now it may go
a
without
bit
saying.
shocking.
Yeah, yeah. It may go without saying that this story comes to us from the J source. This is the same source that brings you God walking in the garden of, where Adam and Eve are, literally walking in the garden, brings you the image of the smell of Noah's sacrifice after the flood reaching God's nostrils. God smells the sacrifice and is pleased. It's the Jay's rendition is the most earthy, and in some fashion, the most, in terms of the presentation of God, is like the most primitive presentation of God. And so, if God's going to do something like killing somebody because, well, you would expect that from Jay. That's something you probably wouldn't get from the priestly source. Okay. What else? Just recently, I was, I think it was in the lectionary, or it was near something in the lectionary, the story where Jesus is confronted by the Sadducees, and the Sadducees, say, you believe in resurrection. Well, okay, here's a scenario. What if a man has a wife and he dies, but he has 7 brothers, and each brother marries the widow, fails to have children, then he dies, and then they keep going through all the brothers. So in a way, it's like one bride for seven brothers, and nobody has children. So the Sadducees are trying to mock Jesus's belief in resurrection by saying, well, in the resurrection, whose wife is she going to be? Because all 7 of the brothers have had her. And Jesus just kind of, he dismisses the premise of the question. He doesn't really answer it because he says the question's ridiculous.
Does the brother-in-law deal come into effect only if the elder brother dies, or does it come into effect if the elder brother does not produce offspring?
It's if he dies.
If he dies.
Yeah, it's if he dies. It's a way. It kind of accomplishes 2 things. It keeps, the thing that people are most afraid of in this time and place, what men are most afraid of, is not having a name. Okay. And if you're a man and you don't have sons to carry your name on, then it's like the centerpiece of your own personal honor has been taken away from you. Now for women, this practice of widows taking functions. I mean, it may sound like something very onerous for the widow, but you got to remember, in this time and place, it's precisely by having children, by having sons, that a widow's security is assured, or is taken care of. It's assumed that if a woman has sons, those sons are going to care for her in her old age. And so a woman who does not have sons, her getting older is, well, it's a threat to her survival if she doesn't have sons. And so in this society, in this world, and so this is understood not only to be good for a deceased man, his name can live on. It also is a way that a widow's existential security can be addressed also.
Well, that's the reason I asked the question about if the husband is unable to produce, do they still do the same thing? Because ultimately, she's going to be in the same position
right.
if her husband is not able to give her sons.
No, yeah, no, fair point. I am not aware of that though. It's later on, this is meant to be, at least from the standpoint of the narrator, this is meant to be a foreshadowing of what's going to get spelled out in the law code. A few hundred years later, when the Israelites have left Egypt and are going to the promised land, and there's the book of Deuteronomy, and this practice is spelled out in the law code, and it's foreshadowed here, and so yeah. Now there's one thing going on here. It's not immediately obvious. It's not obvious from the narration, but it becomes clearer as we go through. But it's important that we know this now, that when Judah sends Tamar away, when he sends her away to go live with her father, he's doing it under a ruse. I mean, he is intending to deceive Tamar with saying this, but he's saying, go and live as a widow. Don't take up another husband. Go live as a widow in your father's house until Sheila is old enough to marry. Okay, and then the idea that you'll marry him, right? That Sheila will take up the brotherly mantle. Okay, that's the ruse, because what Judah is actually afraid that he's going to lose Sheila if Sheila marries, but he doesn't tell Tamar that. He's sending Tamar away under the understanding that when Sheila becomes of age, that they'll get married. But that is not Judah's actual intention. He's afraid that Sheila is going to die just like Aaron Onan did. But he uses Sheila's being too young as an excuse for sending Tamar away right now. Okay, that's important because in a little while Tamar is going to realize that she's been deceived, and she is going to mount a counter deception. Okay. A couple of other notes here that are worth noting. The names here are important because they mean something, and we've noticed this. We've seen this multiple times throughout this book, where names are not accidental. If you look at the sons of Judah by Shua's daughter, Onan, and then Sheila, these names each mean something. Er, means is a word play. It's actually a word play on the Hebrew word for evil. Okay. Now, we are not told how is evil. Okay. It just says that he was, or that he was, what does it actually say? It says, verse 7, but Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. It doesn't say how he was wicked, it just says that he was, and that he apparently was wicked enough to, at least from God's point of view, to merit being put to death. And it doesn't say how God put him to death, whether it was a lightning bolt or just a sudden, it doesn't say. But is a word play on the Hebrew word for evil. Onan Onan, that name is a word play on the Hebrew word that means something like sorrow or trouble. Okay. It's a word play on that. Then Sheila is a word that in Hebrew can mean request. Okay. And you can see how Sheila, meaning request, sort of ties in with what Judah asks Tamar to do. He requests of Tamar that she leave his house and go live with her own father until Sheila is old enough to marry. All right. But again, Judah is not actually intending for this marriage to ever happen because he's afraid. I mean, obviously, he wants sons to be raised up in Er's name, but he's afraid that if they do marry, that he's going to lose his son Sheila also. What seems to be the case, based on the fact that he fears Sheila's death, he doesn't seem to be aware of why Er and Onan are dead. Okay. I mean, he may be, but there's no indication that he actually knows that the reason Er is dead is because Er was wicked, that he was evil, and that Onan is dead because he refused to fulfill what in that culture was a familial duty. Okay. He refused to fulfill his familial duty. If Judah was aware of why they died, he might not be so afraid of Sheila dying, because he could just say, well, Sheila, here's why your older brothers died. If you do differently, you don't have anything to be afraid of. Well, he doesn't seem to be aware of that. So, I mean, he seems to be just afraid that Sheila's going to die, and almost like there's a curse on Tamar or something, and that Tamar is actually the reason that his older two sons are dead, or something. So he sends her away, but with the suggestion, or with the implicit promise that when Sheila is old enough that she'll get to marry that son. But he apparently has no such intention. Okay, so there we are. So now when we turn to verse 12, let's read verse 12 and go. Well, let's go through verse 23. In course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. That's interesting that Shua's daughter is never actually named. She's always Judah's wife is always Shua's daughter, not
in my about that, because in my Bible she's named Bathshua, just like Bathsheba, except it's Bathshua.
Oh,
and each time you said Shua's daughter, I've had Bathshua.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Maybe they made it up. I don't know. There it is.
That's interesting, because in the NRSV, it's not that's not put that way. The Bathshua actually is Hebrew for Shua's daughter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's sort of like in Aramaic. If you remember the old movie, the old classic Charlton Heston movie, Ben-Hur. Mm-hmm. Or in the Gospels, the name Barabbas. Depending on whether we're talking about Hebrew or we're talking about Aramaic, those prefixes that start with B, like Ben or Bar, or in this case Bath, those mean son or daughter of. Okay, and so Ben-Hur is literally the son of her. H-U-R, the
Well,
son of her. Or
it's the
Barabbas
same.
is the son of Abbas, you know.
Oh, all right.
It's the
Uh,
same in the Anglo-Saxon. John's son,
Yeah,
Robert's son.
exactly. Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. Or Mac so and so, you know, Mac McDonald, you know, son
Yeah.
of Donald, you know, things like in the Celtic, things like that. And so Bathsheba would be the daughter of Shua.
But that could actually be her name, right? That
It could be.
be her name.
Yes, it could be.
Yeah, yeah.
Apparently,
I-
apparently what the NRSV does is that it simply translates it. It simply translates the name or translates that word rather than giving it as a proper name. That's interesting. The NRSV did that. I don't see an explanation in my annotations
Mhm.
as
Well,
to
it says it
why.
anticipates Bathsheba. It
Right.
anticipates Bathsheba
Right.
in our notes.
Daughter of Sheba. Yeah, daughter of Sheba. Yeah.
Yeah, that was her name.
Yeah, that's an interesting fact. That's an interesting fact. I wonder why the NRSV decided to translate the words rather than to use it as a proper name. That's interesting. I'll look that up and see if there's something I can find on that. Okay, so let's see. Let's start at verse 12 now. In course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, or Bathshua, died. When Judah's time of mourning was over, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she put off her widow's garments, put on a veil, wrapped herself up, and sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. She saw that Sheila was grown up, yet she had not been given to him in marriage. Okay. So in other words, she sees and knows that, or suspects at this point very strongly, that Judah has no intention of giving Sheila or giving her to Sheila in marriage, given that Sheila is now grown up and nobody said anything. Okay. She saw that Sheila was grown up, yet she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He went over to her at the roadside and said, "Come, let me come into you." Now that's a pretty sexy pickup line. You know, you kind of wonder about Judah right now. I mean, he must be, I mean, granted his wife is dead, so I suppose it's not, you know, it's not the absolute worst thing that you could do. And not recognizing that this is in fact his daughter-in-law whom he had deceived. But anyway, he sees this woman who actually is Tamar, all wrapped up, but he doesn't know that because he can't see her face. And he goes to her on the roadside and says, "Come, let me come into you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" I mean, so she's like kind of playing the part of the prostitute in a way. And he answered, "I will send you a kid from the flock." And she said, "Only if you give me a pledge until you send it." He said, "What pledge shall I give you?" She replied, "Your signet and your cord and the staff that is in your hand." So he gave them to her, the signet, the cord, and the staff. He gave them to her, and he went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she got up and went away. And taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. In other words, out of Judah's sight, she put back on her garments of widowhood. When Judah sent the kid by his friend, the Adulamite, to recover the pledge from the woman, he could not find her. He asked the townspeople, where is the temple prostitute? Where is the temple prostitute who was at Enaim by the wayside? But they said, no prostitute has been here. So he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. Moreover, the townspeople said, no prostitute has been here. Judah replied, let her keep the things as her own, otherwise we will be laughed at. You see, I sent this kid and you could not find her. Let's just keep reading. About 3 months later, actually, no, let's stop, and we'll save the rest of it for. All right.
As an aside, the Presbyterian Women's Circle had this text for the last month in their thing. These proper Presbyterian women chose this text.
Yes.
Okay.
My mom said that I think she said that last Tuesday. Yeah, I know. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? Oh yeah, this is something. All right, so what's up here? It's important that we get the details, that we understand all the details here. She knows she's been deceived. Okay, when she realizes that Sheila is all grown up and nobody's come to try to get them married, that she no longer has to be a widow, she decides to take matters into her own hands and to do a little deception of her own. And so she not only dresses to look like a prostitute, she plays the part when Judah comes thinking that she's a prostitute and says, well, basically, what do you want? How much does it cost? She plays the part. And but this is the really important detail, is that while they agree on a sheep, a kid from the flock, she says, only if you give me a pledge until you send it. And what pledge shall I give you? And she said, your signet and your cord and the staff that is in your hand. Okay. And what does that mean? Well, it's kind of like what we talked about last week. These are like his family symbols. Okay. Remember last week we talked about the ring. The ring was all about family. That the ring symbolizes family identity. To be stripped of the ring, to be stripped of the jewelry, is to be stripped of your family and to be stripped of your identity. And so he is giving her as a pledge that he will, in fact, it's like collateral in a way, that he will send this kid. He gives her this security and gives her these items that are symbols of his family, symbols of him. Okay, this is going to be important later. And so consider what's going on here, and consider how this is in some ways a recapitulation of a theme that we've seen multiple times here in the book of Genesis. We have the deception. We have a deception of a man who is past his young days. We have a deception of a man. We have a woman who is clever and takes matters into her own hands in Tamar. And in this way, Tamar is kind of like Rebecca, Rachel. Both of those matriarchs, Rebecca and Rachel, were themselves clever. They were smart. They were women living in the midst of a highly patriarchal system, but they were not wallflowers. They were smart, and they they lived within this patriarchal system, but man, they knew what they were doing, and they worked that system to their advantage. And this is presented, this is very oddly enough in a patriarchal narrative, this is presented as a good thing.
Mhm.
This is presented as a good thing. This is a woman to be celebrated.
They
Now, what's
manipulated the men.
What's that?
They manipulated the
They do.
situation
They
to
do.
their advantage.
They do. And it's never,
Don't
ever,
we all?
yeah, it's never presented as bad. It's not being presented by the narrator as something, now you women out there, don't be like this, no, there's nothing like that. It's actually presented as an essential part of the story. And in this, you go back to Rebecca and what Rebecca did as Isaac's wife, what Rebecca did to get noticed by Isaac in the first place. And then what Rebecca did to save Jacob's butt, what she did to save Jacob's life and to get him out of there. And she was right there on his whole deception of his father, there was that. And then Rachel. And so Tamar in this sense is kind of standing in that tradition of someone who really is very self-aware and does what she has to do, because she perceives correctly that she's been deceived by Judah, and now she's going to get her payback, and it's going to be a payback that's going to work out not only well for her, but oddly, it's going to work out well for Judah too. Okay. Because, part of all this, it's not explicitly stated, but Judah's sons dying off, Er and Onan. This is basically the reason why he's so concerned to keep Sheila alive, even if he doesn't understand, what it will actually take. That's why he's so concerned to keep Sheila alive. It's because if Sheila died, it's like, again, his identity, his sense of identity and posterity would be gone. And Tamar is actually saving his family. She's saving her own prospects too. She's saving her own life, but she's saving Judah's prospects as well. Okay. And so she conceives. And so she is standing in this wonderful tradition of trickster matriarchs. All right. All right, so let's see. Let's go to verse 24, and we'll finish out the chapter. About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the whore. Moreover, she is pregnant as a result of whoredom." Because again, she's, as far as anyone knows, as far as anyone else knows, she's been a widow in her father's house this whole time. And yet she is now found to be pregnant. Well, how in the world did that happen? And so as far as anyone knows, she's been fooling around with somebody. as far as anyone knows. As far as, well, we'll see. As far as anyone knows. Judah was told, that doesn't actually say who told him this, but your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the whore. Moreover, she is pregnant as a result of whoredom. And Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. Okay, now again, he doesn't know who he slept with before. He thought it was the temple prostitute. Okay, he has no idea. He just thinks she's been fooling around. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, it was the owner of these who made me pregnant. These what? And she said, take note, please, whose these are. The signet and the cord and the staff. Oh, yeah. Then Judah acknowledged them and said, she is more in the right than I, since I did not give her to my son Sheila. And he did not lie with her again. We'll just pause there just for a second. Okay, so he knows, he now, his eyes are open and he sees what Tamar has done. But what's really interesting too is that Judah doesn't get angry. He doesn't say, well, oh gosh, you fooled, you deceived me. I must do something terrible to you now. No, he actually, it's like he recognizes in this moment when he realizes that it was her all along. He says, well, she was actually right. She was actually right to do what she did, because I would not marry off Sheila to her, which she, by the custom, had a right to expect. Okay. And so it's almost like he laughs it off. It's like he recognizes, man, she really tricked me really nicely.
Do you think he could have gotten away with denying it and denying her and saying, I don't recognize these things? It seems like he's far more of a man than either of his sons were. I mean,
yeah.
Decent person.
Yeah, he owns up to it. Yeah, when he sees,
I wonder if he could have if he'd wanted to, if he could have gotten away with.
Which
I
is
suspect he could.
I don't know how you got these things. They must have been stolen from me, or something. No, he recognizes. Yeah. This is the woman I slept with because you have those things. It in his mind, or and in his word to other people. Yeah, this proves it. This settles the matter. This proves that, yes, indeed, I actually slept with Tamar, though I didn't know it. And so he doesn't lie with her again, but he also doesn't try to, get revenge or punish her in any way. But yeah, he owns up to it. Now, what's important, this is an important fact, is that you could see this deception of Judah as a kind of payback for the role that Judah played in his younger brother Joseph's, being sold into slavery into Egypt and deceiving his father, Jacob. It's like deceiving fathers is going on all around. Watch out, Dad, I'm gonna fool you, this kind of thing. All kinds of deceptions of fathers going on. And so, but it's noteworthy that from this moment on, Lois, what you said is that Judah owns up to it. He didn't have to. He just did own up to it. And it doesn't say explicitly, he may have made a connection between his deception here, or his being deceived here, with the fact that he had deceived his father and seen it as a kind of divine justice, seen it as a kind of God working it out so that he kind of gets paid back for what he had done to his father Jacob. And so from this moment on, Judah is going to be a good guy. From this moment on, Judah is going to be a good guy. He's going to play, as we will see as we read through the rest of this book, we're going to see that Judah plays an honorable role in the way things work out between Joseph and eventually his brothers, including Judah. That Judah is going to play an honorable role in that whole relationship. Okay. It also is true that Judah is going to be, of all the brothers. Okay, thanks, Sandy. That of all the brothers, that Judah is going to be the one who, at least ancestrally speaking, is the most important. Because Judah is going to be the ancestor of David, King David. He's going to be the ancestor of, by extension, Jesus himself. Okay. All right.
Well, stranger things have happened, but it's I don't know how long his wife had been dead, but to have sex with a woman and never uncover her face. I mean, obviously she had a covering or a veil on
Right.
the whole time, I guess.
Right,
and
right.
I said that strikes me as being a little unusual, but I guess stranger things have happened.
Well, notice, you remember some of the other stories that we've seen in this book where people have sex and there's no light. People have sex with somebody they're not supposed to have sex with because the lights are off. And that kind of, and they don't know who it is. That happened with Abraham. Abraham had sex with somebody he wasn't supposed to. I think that happened with Lot as well. So, we have cases of them. All right. Now this final part from verse 27 to the end of the chapter also plays on a recurrent theme. And we'll see this.
Mhm.
Of course, Tamar is very pregnant. When the time of her delivery came, there were twins in her womb. Imagine that. While she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and bound on his hand a crimson thread, saying, "This one came out first." But just then he drew back his hand, and out came his brother. And she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." Therefore, he, the one who actually did come out first in total, was named Perez, which in Hebrew means a breach. Afterward, his brother came out with the crimson thread on his hand, and he was named Zerah. And Zerah means brightness, which may refer to the crimson thread, although it's not obvious. That's not entirely clear. But so Perez was going to be the second to come out. He was going to be, but just as Zerah, sticks his hand out, gets the crimson thread on, he's then pushed back, and Perez comes out. The one who is going to be named Perez comes out. And here it's like you have Esau and Jacob all over again. You have two sons fighting each other in their mother's womb. Okay. But whereas in the previous story with Esau and Jacob, Esau did come out first, but it says that Jacob is grabbing his brother's heel, almost like he's trying to pull him back in so that he can come out first. Okay. He's grabbing his brother's heel, trying to pull him back in. And in this case, the Zerah is about to come out first. His hand sticks out, but then it is as though he is pulled back and Perez comes out. And so it's almost like Perez is like Jacob in this story. This is important because it is, of course, Perez who is the ancestor of King David. Okay. And thus we have the Jacob and Esau motif of brothers wrestling in the womb played out again in Tamar's pregnancy. And thus all of this sets up then pretty much all subsequent Israelite history. Okay, although we don't necessarily know that at this point, because the rest of this book, with the exception of the very final chapters, the rest of this book is not going to really tell us that much about Judah or his sons through Tamar. Most of the emphasis is going to be on Judah's younger brother, Joseph, and all the adventures that he had while down in Egypt, and how Joseph eventually saves the whole family when a famine strikes the land of Canaan. All right. Oh boy. Yeah, good stuff today. Good stuff today. Any other thoughts or just reflections on what happened? I just love the humanity of these stories, you know. I just love the humanity of these stories, that there's nobody, really nobody, with the possible exception of the older Abraham, nobody is presented as some kind of pristine saint, man or woman. Nobody is really presented as a pristine saint. The older Abraham is presented as a prophet, and he kind of grows in his moral gravitas as he gets older. But there's never a point where he's presented as some kind of infallible, saint-like figure, and certainly none of the others are. Jacob grows up too. I mean, obviously we see how Jacob, after he gets, he's on the receiving end of deceptions, after his own deceptions, we see Jacob grow up a good bit, but he's never presented, he's never presented as some kind of, perfected saint or anything. And it's often the things that are celebrated, that it's precisely the characters taking matters into their own hands, doing what it takes to survive. These are traits that are actually celebrated in these stories, as opposed to some other reaction. They're actually celebrated. Okay. Well, it is now 11:30, so we and I thought, rather than trying to get into chapter 39 today, I thought we'd just be content with our study of one chapter.
Could you explain a little bit about what a temple prostitute would have been? Obviously, somebody that ranks higher than an ordinary prostitute.
Right. Okay, first of all, a temple prostitute would not be the temple being referred to in the phrase temple prostitute in this context is not the Jewish temple.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's an important.
I would have thought it was, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's for one thing, the temple that we think of in Jerusalem doesn't exist yet. I mean, at least the temple dedicated to the worship of Yahweh, of Jehovah, doesn't exist yet. And so it's not that. No, the temple, in this case, it would refer to a temple of Baal, a temple of Canaanite fertility deities. Okay. So the temple here would not be of God, it would be of the Canaanite gods. Okay. Now, why would you have a temple prostitute, though? Why would you have a prostitute connected with the temple? Well, here's why. Because the gods in question, the gods that were at the center of the Canaanite pantheon of deities, were deities that were connected to fertility. Okay. Agricultural fertility. I mean, it was what survival as a society was rooted in the fertility of crops or fertility of the ground, and successful crops, successful agriculture. And so, the worship of Baal was very popular among the Canaanites. And there were prostitutes that were associated with the worship of Baal. And it was understood as a kind of, I've spoken of this before, I forget the context, but it's considered a form of what anthropologists call sympathetic magic. It's where by enacting a ritual that involves sex, okay, by enacting a ritual that involves sex, you are symbolically acting out what you hope happens in the divine realm of the gods watering the earth, seeding the earth, right? And that by doing the ritual, you're actually enacting what you hope the gods will do. And the belief that if you don't perform the ritual, then there's no hope. There's no hope of the gods doing this. So if you do the ritual, then you hope the gods will do this. And so they'll seed the earth with rain and produce abundant harvests. And so that in a nutshell is what a temple prostitute's purpose is. And so that's what Tamar was presenting herself as. Now what's interesting is the fact not so much that Judah would seek a prostitute, but that he would seek a temple prostitute, because that's a prostitute that is associated with the worship of deities other than the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay.
Well, in my notes,
yeah,
it says that Hera, who is his Judah's friend,
yeah,
it says Hera, to preserve Judah from embarrassment, suggests that the woman he seeks is not a common whore, but one respected in the Canaanite worship. And he's referring that comes from where Judah sends him out to find this person and give her the kid.
yeah.
So that might indicate that Judah wasn't really looking for a temple prostitute. His friend was just trying to pretend that he hadn't picked up a common prostitute.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Oh yeah, because there were such things as common prostitutes that were not associated with the worship of a deity, but just,
But maybe Judah thought that she was, he does say, where is that temple prostitute?
Yeah. And whether that's a fair point. Whether she presented herself as a temple prostitute or he had it in his own head that she was a temple prostitute. Now, whether she helped him make that identification, I'm not sure is clear. In fact, I don't think it is clear. But he had it in his own head that she was, and maybe with the help of Hera. Yeah, maybe with the help of Hera.
Yeah, he actually sent Hera out to ask about her.
Which in a way would make his act maybe just ever so slightly less sad. Ever so slightly less sad.
Well, if all the temple prostitutes got pregnant as quickly as Tamar did, it seems like there'd be a problem right there.
That's right. You'd have all these children without fathers. Yeah, exactly. Presumably, I don't know this for a fact, but presumably those children would go back into the service of the temple. They'd be employed in the worship of the temple. But I'm actually not sure about that. That's an interesting question, and I had not thought about that. So, all right. Well, we are at our end now. So let's why don't we go ahead and close with prayer, and then we'll go our ways. I've got communion visits this afternoon, and so be out of the office all afternoon. All right, so let's close with prayer. Oh God, we give you thanks for this day and for all your many blessings. Thank you for this season as we look forward to Thanksgiving. We pray that you fill our hearts with true gratitude for all the ways that you have been present to us, real to us, have moved in our lives. And may that gratitude bring us joy. We pray for all who are in need today, all who suffer, who struggle, all who are sick, and for those who care for them. Lord, we pray these things now in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, everyone. Well, y'all have a good rest of the week, and I'll see you next week.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Yeah. War Eagle. Okay. Bye-bye.